Pickett's charge was an infantry assault ordered by Confederate Gen. Robert E. Lee against Maj. Gen. George G. Meade's Union positions on Cemetery Ridge on July 3, 1863, the last day of the Battle of Gettysburg in the state of Pennsylvania during the American Civil War. Its futility was predicted by the charge's commander, Lt. Gen. James Longstreet, and it was arguably an avoidable mistake from which the Southern war effort never fully recovered militarily or psychologically. The farthest point reached by the attack has been referred to as the high water mark of the Confederacy. The charge is named after Maj. Gen. George Pickett, one of 3 Confederate generals who led the assault under Longstreet. After Confederate attacks on both Union flanks had failed the day and night before, Lee was determined to strike the Union center on the third day. On the night of July 2, Meade correctly predicted at a council of war that Lee would try an attack on his lines in the center the following morning. The infantry assault was preceded by a massive artillery bombardment that was meant to soften up the Union defense and silence its artillery, but was largely ineffective. Although some Confederates were able to breach the low stone wall that shielded many of the Union defenders, they could not maintain their hold and were repulsed with over 50% casualties. A decisive defeat that ended the 3-day battle and Lee's campaign into Pennsylvania. Years later, when asked why his charge at Gettysburg failed, Pickett replied, "I've always thought the Yankees had something to do with it, plans and command structures." Pickett's charge was planned for 3 Confederate divisions, commanded by Maj. Gen. George Pickett, Brig. Gen. J. Johnston Pettigrew, and Maj. Gen. Isaac R. Trimble, consisting of troops from Lt. Gen. James Longstreet's 1st Corps and Lt. Gen. A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps. Pettigrew commanded brigades from Maj. Gen. Henry Heth's old division, under Col. Burkett D. Fry, Col. James K. Marshall, Brig. Gen. Joseph R. Davis, and Col. John M. Brockenborough. Trimble, commanding Maj. Gen. Dorsey Pender's division, had the brigades of Brig. Gens. Alfred M. Scales and James H. Lane. 2 brigades from Maj. Gen. Richard H. Anderson's division were to support the attack on the right flank. Brig. Gen. Cadmus M. Wilcox and Col. David Lang. The target of the Confederate assault was the center of the Union Army of the Potomac 2nd Corps, commanded by Maj. Gen. Winfield S. Hancock. Directly in the center was the division of Brig. Gen. John Gibbon with the brigades of Brig. Gen. William Harrow, Col. Norman J. Hall, and Brig. Gen. Alexander S. Webb. To the north of this position were brigades from the division of Brig. Gen. Alexander Hayes, and to the south was Maj. Gen. Abner Doubleday's division of the 1st Corps, including the 2nd Vermont Brigade of Brig. Gen. George J. Stannard and the 121st Pennsylvania under the command of Col. Chapman Biddle. Meade's headquarters were just behind the 2nd Corps line, in the small house owned by the widow Lydia Leicester. The specific objective of the assault has been the source of historical controversy. Traditionally, the copse of trees on Cemetery Ridge has been cited as the visual landmark for the attacking force. Historical treatments such as the 1993 film Gettysburg continue to popularize this view, which originated in the work of Gettysburg battlefield historian John B. Batchelder in the 1880s. However, recent scholarship, including published works by some Gettysburg National Military Park historians, has suggested that Lee's goal was actually Ziegler's Grove on Cemetery Hill, a more prominent and highly visible grouping of trees about 300 yards north of the copse. The much-debated theory suggests that Lee's general plan for the second-day attacks had not changed on the third day, and the attacks on July 3 were also aimed at securing the hill and the network of roads it commanded. The copse of trees, currently a prominent landmark, was under 10 feet high in 1863, only visible to a portion of the attacking columns from certain parts of the battlefield. From the beginning of the planning, things went awry for the Confederates. While Pickett's division had not been used yet at Gettysburg, A.P. Hill's health became an issue and he did not participate in selecting which of his troops were to be used for the charge. Some of Hill's corps had fought lightly on July 1 and not at all on July 2. However, troops that had done heavy fighting on July 1 ended up making the charge. Although the assault is known to popular history as Pickett's Charge, overall command was given to James Longstreet, and Pickett was one of his divisional commanders. Lee did tell Longstreet that Pickett's fresh division should lead the assault, so the name is appropriate. Although some recent historians have used the name Pickett-Pettigrew-Trimble assault to more fairly distribute the credit. With Hill sidelined, Pettigrew's and Trimble's divisions were delegated to Longstreet's authority as well. Thus, Pickett's name has been lent to a charge in which he commanded 3 out of the 11 brigades while under the supervision of his corps commander. Throughout, Pickett's men were almost exclusively from Virginia, with the other divisions consisting of troops from North Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee. The supporting troops under Wilcox and Lang were from Alabama and Florida. In conjunction with the infantry assault, Lee planned a cavalry action in the Union rear. Marge, Gen. J.E.B. Stuart led his cavalry division to the east, prepared to exploit Lee's hoped-for breakthrough by attacking the Union rear and disrupting its line of communications along the Baltimore Pike. Despite Lee's hope for an early start, it took all morning to arrange the infantry assault force. Neither Lee's nor Longstreet's headquarters sent orders to Pickett to have his division on the battlefield by daylight. Historian Jeffrey D. Wirt blames this oversight on Longstreet, describing it either as a misunderstanding of Lee's verbal order or a mistake. Some of the many criticisms of Longstreet's Gettysburg performance by the postbellum Lost Cause authors cite this failure as evidence that Longstreet deliberately undermined Lee's plan for the battle. Meanwhile, on the far right end of the Union line, a 7-hour battle raged for the control of Culp's Hill. Lee's intent was to synchronize his offensive across the battlefield, keeping Meade from concentrating his numerically superior force. But the assaults were poorly coordinated and Marge, Gen. Edward Allegheny Johnson's attacks against Culp's Hill petered out just as Longstreet's cannonade began. Artillery barrage. The infantry charge was preceded by what Lee hoped would be a powerful and well-concentrated cannonade of the Union center, destroying the Union artillery batteries that could defeat the assault and demoralizing the Union infantry. But a combination of inept artillery leadership and defective equipment doomed the barrage from the beginning. Longstreet's corps artillery chief, Col. Edward Porter Alexander, had effective command of the field. Lee's artillery chief, Marge. Gen. William N. Pendleton, played little role other than to obstruct the effective placement of artillery from the other two corps. Despite Alexander's efforts, then, there was insufficient concentration of Confederate fire on the objective. The July 3 bombardment was likely the largest of the war, with hundreds of cannons from both sides firing along the lines for 1 to 2 hours. Starting around 1 p.m., Confederate guns numbered between 150 and 170 and fired from a line over 2 miles long, starting in the south at the Peach Orchard and running roughly parallel to the Emmetsburg Road. Confederate Brig. Gen. Evander M. Law wrote, "The cannonade in the center presented one of the most magnificent battle scenes witnessed during the war. Looking up the valley towards Gettysburg, the hills on either side were capped with crowns of flame and smoke, as 300 guns about equally divided between the two ridges, vomited their iron hail upon each other. Despite its ferocity, the fire was mostly ineffectual. Confederate shells often overshot the infantry front lines, in some cases because of inferior shell fuses that delayed detonation, and the smoke covering the battlefield concealed that fact from the gunners. Union Artillery Chief Brig. Gen. Henry J. Hunt had only about 80 guns available to conduct counter-battery fire. The geographic features of the Union line had limited areas for effective gun emplacement. He also ordered that firing cease to conserve ammunition, but to fool Alexander, Hunt ordered his cannons to cease fire slowly to create the illusion that they were being destroyed one by one. By the time all of Hunt's cannons ceased fire, and still blinded by the smoke from battle, Alexander fell for Hunt's deception and believed that many of the Union batteries had been destroyed. Hunt had to resist the strong arguments of Hancock, who demanded Union fire to lift the spirits of the infantryman pinned down by Alexander's bombardment. Even Meade was affected by the artillery. The Leicester house was a victim of frequent overshots, and he had to evacuate with his staff to Powers Hill. The day was hot, 87 degrees Fahrenheit by one account, and humid, and the Confederates suffered under the hot sun and from the Union counter-battery fire as they awaited the order to advance. When Union cannoneers overshot their targets, they often hit the massed infantry waiting in the woods of Seminary Ridge or in the shallow depressions just behind Alexander's guns, causing significant casualties before the charge began. Longstreet had opposed the charge from the beginning, convinced the charge would fail, and had his own plan that he would have preferred for a strategic movement around the Union left flank. He claimed to have told Lee, "General, I have been a soldier all my life. I have been with soldiers engaged in fights by couples, by squads, companies, regiments, divisions, and armies, and should know, as well as anyone, what soldiers can do. It is my opinion that no 15,000 men ever arrayed for battle can take that position." Longstreet wanted to avoid personally ordering the charge by attempting to pass the mantle on to young Colonel Alexander, telling him that he should inform Pickett at the optimum time to begin the advance. Based on his assessment that the Union artillery had been effectively silenced, although he had insufficient information to accomplish this, Alexander eventually notified Pickett that he was running dangerously short of ammunition, sending the message, "If you are coming at all, come at once, or I cannot give you proper support." But the enemy's fire has not slackened at all. At least 18 guns are still firing from the cemetery itself. Pickett asked Longstreet, "General, shall I advance?" Longstreet's memoir recalled, "The effort to speak the order failed, and I could only indicate it by an affirmative blow." Longstreet made one final attempt to call off the assault. After his encounter with Pickett, he discussed the artillery situation with Porter and was informed that Porter did not have full confidence that all the enemy's guns were silenced, and that the Confederate ammunition was almost exhausted. Longstreet ordered Porter to stop Pickett, but the young colonel explained that replenishing his ammunition from the trains in the rear would take over an hour, and this delay would nullify any advantage the previous barrage had given them. The infantry assault went forward without the Confederate artillery close support that had been originally planned.